Have you heard of the chemical ethane? In our lives, this chemical may not be as important as natural gas. But for an industrial country, it is used to make tens of thousands of products such as plastics, rubber, fibers, coatings, etc. Once the ethane supply is interrupted, it will affect the production of ethylene and then affect the entire chemical chain. In May of this year, Trump began to announce the implementation of the export license approval system for ethane exports to China. Subsequently, 3 super-large ethane carriers that were originally planned to sail to China were suddenly stopped by the United States on the way. The 3 ships were loaded with 2.2 million barrels of ethane cargo, with a total value of up to $200 million. In order not to delay the original port call plan, Enterprise Products urgently reapplied for export license from the U.S. government. However, the U.S. directly rejected the application on the grounds of military risk and ordered a ban on ethane exports to China. So the question is, why did the U.S. suddenly ban the export of ethane to China? How will China be affected without the US ethane? If you like our video content, please click to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can receive all our latest video content. Now, let's get into today's topic. In the past few years, driven by the shale gas revolution, the United States has seen explosive growth in natural gas production, gradually becoming the world's largest natural gas producer. In 2023, the United States natural gas production has accounted for more than 25% of the world's total, with an average daily output of 112 billion cubic feet. The huge natural gas production naturally provides a sufficient source of raw materials for the production of ethane. Let's take the extraction of shale gas in the United States as an example. For every 100 cubic meters of shale gas extracted, about 30 cubic meters of natural gas condensate can be extracted, of which ethane accounts for as much as 42%. It is worth noting that the main source of ethane in the United States is the Permian Basin in Texas. The ethane content in shale gas in this area is usually between 12% and 35%, far exceeding the average level of most other producing areas in the world. And with the continuous maturity of mining technologies, such as hydraulic fracturing, shale gas fields that were difficult to develop in the past can now be mined on a large scale. In 2024, the annual ethane production in the United States has reached 61.09 million tons, accounting for 56% of the global total production. Among them, the export volume has also reached 8.85 million tons, mainly sold to the European and American markets. Among these buyers, China is the largest importer of ethane in the United States. Current data shows that China's dependence on ethane imports has reached 98%. In 2024, the national ethane demand will be about 6.8 million tons, of which imports account for 5.53 million tons. Among them, almost all, about 98% of imported ethane comes from the United States. Why is China so dependent on American ethane? In the final analysis, it is because the cost-effectiveness of American ethane is too high. The purity of ethane exported from the United States is usually above 95%, and companies can basically use it directly after getting it, with almost no additional processing, saving time and effort. Another is the cheap price. In 2024, the FOB price of ethane in the United States is about $140 per ton. The shipping cost is $50, plus loading and unloading, insurance, tariffs, and other costs. The landed price is about $320. Compared with other countries, American ethane has obvious advantages in price, quality, and convenience. But now, the United States has suddenly suspended ethane exports to China. What is going on? We all know that China has made great progress in various fields over the past decade, especially in the electric vehicle industry. Now, China has accounted for more than 70% of the global new energy passenger vehicle market and may reach more than 80% in the future. But the problem is that the United States certainly does not want China's electric vehicle industry to continue to develop. In May of this year, Trump began to announce the implementation of the Export License Approval System for ethane exports to China. This means that if American companies want to export ethane with a purity of more than 95% to China in the future, they must first obtain permission from the US Department of Commerce. Otherwise, the export will be prohibited. In June of this year, 3 super-large ethane carriers that were originally heading to China were intercepted by the United States. The 3 ships were shipped by 2 American energy giants, Enterprise Products and Energy Transfer. If the ethane cannot be delivered to Chinese ports on time, the 2 companies may have to pay more than $200 million in liquidated damages. Subsequently, in order to deliver ethane to China in a timely manner, Enterprise quickly resubmitted an export application for 2.2 million barrels of ethane to the United States, but was rejected by the U.S. Security Department on the grounds that ethane may be used for military purposes in China. At present, the 3 super-large ethane carriers have given up going to China and turned to look for new buyers. However, Trump's series of actions have added variables to the trade relationship between China and the United States and also put the U.S. domestic ethane industry in trouble. As we mentioned earlier, China is the largest buyer of U.S. ethane exports. In 2024, China imported about 4.7 million tons of ethane from the United States, accounting for nearly 46% of the total U.S. ethane exports. According to current market expectations, China's ethane imports may hit a new high in 2025, expected to be between 6.3 million tons and 8.2 million tons, an increase of 9% to 34%. But the problem is that the United States has suddenly called a halt to ethane exports to China, which has forced U.S. ethane exporters into a dead end, because they can't find a second market like China that has huge demand for ethane. Then, if U.S. ethane exporters can't find buyers in the short term, they will definitely store ethane. At present, the 3 ships of Enterprise Products that have been intercepted are worth nearly $200 million, and the backlog at the terminal will also lose $300,000 in storage fees every day. Compared with other chemical materials, ethane has a boiling point as low as -88.6 degrees Celsius, which makes it particularly easy to gasify or even explode at room temperature, so it must be stored in ultra-low temperature special tanks. This also means that if it cannot be sold for one day, the company will have to burn tens of thousands of dollars in storage costs. If the ban is delayed for half a year, the ethane inventory may exceed the safety limit, and the company will have to empty or burn it. Of course, Trump's interception of ethane ships has begun to shake the price system of the entire market. According to the latest data I found, as of June 4th this year, the FOB price of ethane in the United States has fallen to $139.88 per ton, a drop of nearly $28 in just 1 week, a drop of 17%. Affected by the continuous decline in the U.S. FOB price, the landed cost of ethane in China has also fallen. It is currently estimated to be 3,267 yuan per ton, 231 yuan less than on May 29th, a drop of 6.7%. According to industry insiders, if the U.S. restrictions on export licenses continue, the market supply and demand will continue to be mismatched, and the price of ethane may continue to fall, which will be an irreparable blow to the entire industry. But after losing ethane exports from the United States, China is not completely unaffected. As we said before, China's ethane import dependence is as high as 98%, and almost all of these imports come from the United States. Once the United States cuts off supply, the companies that rely on ethane raw materials to produce ethylene will be the most directly affected. According to data estimates, if ethane imports are reduced by half, China will have a raw material gap of about 3.57 million tons. This gap will directly affect the annual ethylene production capacity of about 1.2 million tons. In the short term, if Chinese companies want to use naphtha or liquefied petroleum gas to replace ethane to produce ethylene, this means that the overall production cost of ethylene will increase by 30% to 50%. But if China no longer purchases ethane from the United States and instead purchases it from the Middle East, the cost of each ton of ethylene will increase by 400 to 1,000 yuan. And don't forget that the purity of ethane in the United States is generally above 95%, while the purity of ethane in the Middle East is only about 90%, and the quality will be much worse, which will further increase the downstream production costs. But then again, these problems will indeed bring some challenges to domestic companies in the short term. But these impacts are still within controllable range. So after losing ethane exports from the United States for a long time, how will China respond next? As far as I know, by 2024, China will have a total ethylene production capacity of about 35 million tons, of which 68% is produced by the traditional naphtha cracking process. The proportion of ethane cracking is actually only 13%. More importantly, in the same month when the United States restricted the export of ethane to China, China also found a new route to replace ethane and has made major technological breakthroughs. At present, the world's first wind-power-to-ethylene device independently developed by China has achieved continuous production. This technology is very cutting-edge. First, use solar power to generate hydrogen, then use captured carbon dioxide to synthesize methanol, and finally convert methanol into ethylene. According to the calculations of the Chinese scientific research team, the comprehensive cost of this green path is 12% cheaper than imported ethane. In addition, engineers in Karamay, Xinjiang, China, have developed a cryogenic separation device. At minus 170 degrees Celsius, the ethane extraction rate from shale gas has soared from 60% to 95%, reducing energy consumption by 40%, and the cost of a single set of equipment is 30% cheaper than imported American goods. In addition to its own production, China will also begin to increase imports of ethane from other countries, including Canada. According to the information I found, Canada is very rich in oil and gas resources, especially in ethane. Their domestic ethane supply capacity is quite stable, with an annual output of about 4 million tons, mainly from conventional natural gas fields in the western region and some shale gas resources. Compared with the United States, Canada has a lower cost in ethane production. Their raw material cost is about $180 per ton, which is $20 cheaper than the United States. Moreover, the purity of the ethane they produce is close to 99%, which is more advantageous than the 95% in the United States. Moreover, Canada is recently building the world's first net zero emission integrated ethylene cracking unit and derivative production base. The total planned investment of this project is as high as $6.5 billion US. It has been launched in 2024 and mainly includes three parts: a new ethylene cracking unit, a polyethylene production line with an annual output of 2 million tons, and the upgrading and transformation of existing equipment to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality. Moreover, the entire project will be promoted in stages. The first phase is expected to be completed and put into production in 2027, when it will add approximately 1.285 million tons/year of ethylene and polyethylene production capacity. And the second phase is planned to be put into operation in 2029, adding approximately 600,000 tons/year of production capacity. Therefore, China chooses to purchase ethane from Canada because of their existing resources and future development potential. In fact, Canada is not China's only choice. After the United States suddenly adjusted its ethane export policy, the UAE was the first to jump out and actively expressed its willingness to export ethane to China, with a price 10% cheaper than that of the United States. Saudi Arabia was also not idle and took the initiative to strengthen procurement negotiations with China. According to the information I investigated, some Chinese importers are currently actively negotiating with the Middle East and specifically require in the new contract that the transportation route must bypass the U.S. route, in order to avoid being choked by the United States again. We can see that when U.S. officials signed the export ban, they thought they were strangling China, but in fact they were strangling their own companies. They originally wanted to force China to make concessions on rare earths by restricting ethane exports, but they did not expect that this move would force China to speed up its efforts to get rid of external dependence. To not miss out on our future projects and news updates, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We will continue to provide you with more exciting and interesting content.